Okay, welcome everybody. Let's get started. For those of you who I have not met yet, you don't know me, I thought I'd just give you a quick 1-minute resume. And by the way, if the GoToWebinar control panel is in the way of the slides, there is a white arrow in a red box in the top left corner of that control panel. And if that white arrow is pointing to the right side of your screen, you can, if you put your cursor on it, you'll see a little message says hide or show the control panel. So you can open and close that control panel. If, for example, you want to ask me a question and you've hidden the control panel, you will need to open the control panel or show the control panel and type your question into the question box. I think I'm going to proceed through the entire presentation, and I'll look at the end for questions because it's hard to monitor questions when when you're giving a presentation. I think that we should be done in about 45 minutes at most. We'll see how it goes, and then if there are questions at the end, I will do my best to answer those questions. Okay, so let me just give you my 1-minute resume. My career spans 35 years. I first started as a sales manager in my father's company, and then I owned my own company, consulting on business development and building out process-dependent businesses. I've started and sold a company. As an entrepreneur and business owner, I've most likely experienced everything that you have. I've seen it all. I mean, in my own business and in our consulting. Our company, Business Design Corporation, was started in the early 90s as a consulting company. And in the early days, and for many years, we were eMyth consultants. Many of you are probably familiar with Michael Gerber and his eMyth series of books. But what we found was that this eMyth mastery program, the product that we were delivering, it was like a fire hose of theory. Much of it was good stuff, but our clients were spending tens of thousands of dollars and 12, 18, 24 months of time, after which they still didn't have processes documented and implemented. And given that this is the very foundation on which the eMyth theory is built, we decided to focus specifically on that, on process implementation. And in 1994, we went to work on a web-based tool called the Touchstone business system. And we really developed into a software company and began partnering with alliances like Nexstar to assist their members, you, with getting your processes organized and more easily implemented so you can manage and grow with more consistency, more reliability, and be able to train and manage your employees with more ease and efficiency. In the Nexstar portal, there is a lesson plan. It's called the job description lesson. And there are some additional assets on job descriptions. Many of you have probably seen this. The lesson distinguishes between two types of job descriptions. That is the key topic today, is job descriptions as a management tool. So there are these two types of job descriptions in the Nexstar portal. One is called the internal and the other is called the external job description. The purpose of the external job description is to attract qualified candidates and provide an accurate description of what the job entails. It is essentially the document that you put on the web to hire a new employee. This is the document. Let me just bring this across. This is the document that is the external job description. This tool is really a description of who you are as a company and a very brief description of the tasks of the job, as you see here, and the skills and experience, what someone in this position will be doing. You can see that this document is not designed for training or managing an employee. It's designed to attract candidates during the hiring process. Then there is the internal job description. So the purpose of the internal job description, as described in the Nexstar portal, and I quote, is to set expectations with your staff and to use as a tool for performance management. So in today's presentation, I want to talk about how you do this. how do you actually use the job description for measuring and increasing employee performance and company efficiencies? There are 3 or 4 management processes that you can use. We're going to be talking a little bit about training, holding employees accountable, managing, and then evaluating job performance or performance reviews. But we're going to need to take the idea of the internal job description a little deeper, a little further. Now, some of you on the call today probably already have a subscription to Touchstone, but for those of you who have not heard of our alliance with Nexstar and have never seen or heard of the Touchstone business system, we developed Touchstone to make it easier to train, manage, and hold employees accountable to the procedures you need them to follow. I'm going to go into this in a little more detail at the end of the presentation, but just so you know, Touchstone is actually connected to the Nexstar portal. If I toggle over to Touchstone, oh, hold on 1 minute, let me find it. It's right here. If I toggle over to Touchstone and click on this key function, oh, and by the way, Eileen Damshin from Mainstream Electric Heating and Cooling has been kind enough to allow me to use her Touchstone account as well as her process of working with us as an example for you today. Jim Hamilton, many of you probably know Jim. He's one of the Nexstar coaches. Together, Jim and I created a library from the business operations playbook, the Nexstar business operations playbook. All of the processes from the business operations playbook, and that that job description lesson plan was one of them, are actually downloadable from a library of processes into your own Touchstone account so that you can customize them. And there are actually links to the Nexstar portal to the specific assets and materials used in the playbook. So the job description lesson, as an example, can be accessed by clicking on that button coming up here, clicking Nexstar Process Library, sliding down till you see the job description lesson. I've already downloaded this into Eileen's account, and it will actually download the job description lesson into your account, and then you can edit it. And you'll notice here that if I right-click on this link, it will actually open that video. It will go directly to that job description process in the Nexstar portal with the video and all of the assets right here. So one of the benefits of Touchstone is that it makes finding what you need in the Nexstar portal that much easier. The assets are already hyperlinked to the specific process that you're using. Now, to be clear, Touchstone is a tool that focuses on process implementation. It is much more than just another way to access the Nexstar portal, and you do not need Touchstone to access the portal. Touchstone just makes it easier to find what you're looking for. And you probably have hundreds of processes in your business, many more than what can be found in the portal, and you want to be able to customize them and implement them in your company easily. So Touchstone is designed to do that. You don't have to have a Touchstone account to take advantage of the lessons that I'm going to be teaching you in today's presentation. I'm going to use it because I want to show you how easily it can be to use your job descriptions more effectively to get new employees up to speed quickly, easily, and efficiently. I'm going to click on this organizational chart button. And again, I want to use Touchstone in today's demonstration because it just makes it so much easier to use your job descriptions as a management tool. If you're not using Touchstone, you will need to use the external job description, all of the individual processes that you need the employee to follow, and you'll also need the position's operations manual, which I'm sure most of you have these 3 different key things: the job description, the processes, and a position-specific operations manual. But in Touchstone, these are all integrated together, and that's one reason why it makes it so much easier to keep them current and to make them accessible to your people. Now, today's presentation, it's not meant to be a demo of Touchstone, but I am going to use Mainstream's account to show you how easy it can be if you've been challenged in doing this in the past. And again, just to train, manage, and evaluate an employee, you can do this without using Touchstone. It just is a little bit easier with Touchstone. So I'm logged into Mainstream's Touchstone account, and I've clicked on their organization chart. This is the org chart that Elaine has created for her company. I'm going to focus on these two positions today, the CSR customer service rep and what Eileen calls the CSR expert, which is basically the CSR manager. I'm going to click on the CSR position. This is how I access the job description for that position. So this is our version, or the touchstone version, of the internal job description. The difference between Nexstar's internal job description and a touchstone job description, in touchstone, everything listed is linked to the instructions for how to perform that process. So to illustrate, let me pull across the internal job description. This is the internal job description that I downloaded from the job description lesson plan. And on the internal job description, the first item listed is under responsibilities, is to convert incoming calls into booked service appointments. Now, these highlighted items are not here. This is essentially what we do with job descriptions when we are thinking about these internal job descriptions and converting them into touchstone job descriptions. The question is, well, what is the process for booking a call? We know our CSRs need to do this, but how? How do they do it? How do you book a call? What, or maybe where, is the script that can be used for booking a call? Now, most of you probably have separate processes documented for these responsibilities. They're probably saved somewhere on a hard drive or a network file server, or maybe Google Docs or Dropbox. And the processes that are relevant to this specific role have probably been gathered together and organized in a position-specific operations manual. And maybe that's also been saved independently of the processes somewhere in Google Docs or some other place. The challenge with organizing your processes separately from your internal job description and separately from your operations manual is keeping them current. Often what happens is people make changes to the process, and then they choose the file save as option. And now, who knows where these files are saved? And the operations manual for the position hasn't been updated because it's not integrated. They're not dynamic, they're static documents. In Touchstone, as I mentioned, the instructions for how to perform the processes are linked to the position's job description. So you'll see in this example, the process responsibility is to convert incoming calls into booked service appointments. If I toggle back to Touchstone, here's the booking a call process right here. And here's convert incoming customer calls into booked service appointments. And Elaine's added a little bit more. This process assures the customer calls are answered promptly with a courtesy notice of arrival time, and that technicians are dispatched in a way that makes efficient use of their time. And the script is right here. So this is the booking a call script. It's a great day at Mainstream Electric Heating, Cooling, and Plumbing. This is Michael Mills. How can we make you smile today? You guys all know this script. When I click on the process, I get the information for how to perform the call. And because the process is linked to the job description, any changes to the processes, if I decide to make changes to the processes, they're automatically updated on the job description because it's a dynamic, not static tool. All of this content's always going to be current and accurate. So I'll use these instructions for training, role-playing, managing, evaluating, in the responsibility of converting incoming calls into booked service appointments. So this is the job description's biggest value. It makes training, managing, and evaluations very tangible. That's a key word, tangible. All of the responsibilities of this position are listed on the job description. If I go back to, just let me click back to the job description. All of the responsibilities of this position are listed on the job description. And every single process, as we click on it, provides the instructions for how to do that process, which will ensure consistency, reliability, and a high level of quality assurance for your company. Management can be a very difficult thing when you are hunting for the processes needed to train a new employee. trying to find the right processes and the most current ones. A lot of times managers will give up, or they'll train using partial processes or processes that are no longer current. And they'll fill in the pieces. They'll say, well, like just watch what I do. So they'll either say, just shadow this person, or they'll talk about it. Trying to manage people who have been trained only in parts of their processes, or if they haven't had very formal training, they've just shadowed another employee, they've learned by watching someone else, they have very little to fall back on after they've shadowed. Now they're going to start filling in the gaps on their own. They're going to start making it up as they go along. And when they do it incorrectly, it's upsetting. It's upsetting to colleagues, it's upsetting to managers, it's upsetting to owners, and it's upsetting to customers. And you have to now start retraining. We call the process of training by talking or shadowing the tribal method of training. You know, if we were in small tribes back in the caveman days, we would probably be sharing our processes, you know, how to hunt, how to make a fire, whatever it is. We would probably do that by singing or chanting or cave paintings or something like that. But in today's fast changing, lack of attention span, ADD world, the tribal method of training, it just no longer works. And it's just not fair to criticize the employee and let them know that they're not succeeding when they haven't had adequate training. If the manager has not been held accountable to showing them how to succeed in a tangible way, not just "I told you so," and there is little, if any, accurate content to return to if they've forgotten or if they're confused about what they've been trained in. So the job description can fulfill that purpose. So let's talk about how to use the job description as a training tool. And there are two types of training. There's new employee training and there is ongoing training. And again, the job description is key for both of these management purposes. I'm going to toggle back to Touchstone, click on the well, here's where I want to go, right to the, so basically where I am, if I was to click on the org chart and click on CSR, I am on the CSR's job description. And this again is the internal job description. For new employee training, the job description becomes a comprehensive checklist of everything the new employee needs to be trained in. Even if none of these processes are actually documented, you now have this list of what this employee is responsible for. And I would suggest that this is still a very beneficial training tool. This gives you a complete list of everything that you need to teach the new employee, a clear, specific list of what this employee needs to do. If any of the processes are documented, this becomes an even more powerful training checklist, not only of what they need to do, but how they need to do it. You can walk through one process at a time and train them on how to do that work. In Touchstone, if you come to the dashboard, you can begin to check off the processes that you've trained. So if I'm the CSR expert, for example, and again, remember, this is what Mainstream calls their CSR manager. These are the CSRs who I manage, and I can click on any one of these CSRs that report to me, Jamie Mills, for example, and I can see all of Jamie's processes that he needs to be trained in. These are all of the processes from his job description. So because this is a dynamic tool, what I'm saying here is that if I go back here to the organization chart and click on CSR, you'll see that there are 12 processes on Jamie's or on the CSR's job description. When I go back to the dashboard and click on Jamie, these are the exact same processes. The 12 processes are all right here. The difference here is that they've been organized and customized in groups to make it easier for the CSR to do his job. So the processes here are organized by scripts. You'll see that Mainstream has created a group of scripts, a group for administrative tasks, a group for training tasks, and then Service Titan processes are down here. If I click on any one of these processes, I see the script for this entire process. And by the way, this is mobile compatible, tablet compatible, so this works either way. It's basically an app on the phone, or you can run it on your computer. But I click on the script, and I will now walk through, remember we're training, new employee training, I will walk through this entire script and I'll role play it with Jamie. And when I feel like he's learned it, I can check off that he's been trained. And Touchstone will put a green check mark beside that process. So now I know that Jamie has been trained in this specific process, and Touchstone timestamps actually the date and time when I trained Jamie in this process. And I can also include a training note, such as how long it took me to train Jamie in the specific process, or any other note that I choose to write. So if I click here, I can see that I trained Jamie on this date at that time. And if I click into this note, I can actually write a little note about that. So you can now use the job description as a checklist to check off that you've trained. I've trained happy calls, I've trained booking a call, I've trained standby script, and now I have to start training on the outbounding script. There's no longer any argument about whether or not the employee has been trained. And so often we hear stories of a manager and an employee having an argument. And the employee says, but you never trained me in that. And the manager says, well, yes, I did. But there's no record that the training actually occurred. And so the employee and the manager are left in a stalemate. It's basically an argument that really should never have happened in the first place. Now you have a record of the completion of that training, and there's no longer an argument. I mean, it sounds simple, right? It's beautiful when it works this way, and there are always going to be instances when a process, maybe the process hasn't been documented, or you might say something like, well, I just did that yesterday. It's not really a process because I'm not going to do it again. So there are things that go on in your mind like that, but if your mind's going there, let go of the variables and focus on what is consistent. The majority of what all employees do, whether you believe it or not, is rudimentary and consistent. Some of it can be more complicated than other things based on the work they do, but the majority of it is consistent. You can take this even a step further. If you're the owner of the business on the call today, this is so important. This is paramount to being able to stay profitable when you're growing. Let's imagine that each of these processes on the job description have been documented. And as a manager, I've paid attention to the process. I've paid attention to the process of training my reporting employees. And I now know how long it takes me to train an employee in each one of these processes. So for example, it might have taken me 15 or 20 minutes to run through the happy call script. I gave Jamie another 30 minutes to review it and practice it. And then together we spent another 15, 20 minutes role playing it the following day. So that'd be a total of 40, 45 minutes of my time and maybe 60 minutes of the time for Jamie. Now, one process might take 20 minutes. Another process might take several hours, maybe even several days. When you add up the training time for each of the processes listed on the job description and multiply it by what you pay that position, and then you add in your management time, you now have a very good sense of what it's going to cost the company to hire a new CSR, and you're going to know how long it's going to take to get that new employee up to speed. If I go back to the org chart, this is a magical thing to know. If you have your organizational chart set up and you're considering who you're going to hire next and you're growing the company, think how valuable this information is. It helps you prepare. You know what it's going to cost the company in both time and money to hire a new CSR or any position on this org chart. And the job description is key to this. Additionally, with the new employee training, if I've hired someone and I've made a mistake, I'm going to be able to spot that I've made that mistake much sooner if I'm walking them through a step-by-step training of every process like this. If I hired someone last year and I know it should only take about 40 hours to train in all of these procedures, and I'm currently training someone and they're just not getting it after, say, 25 or 30 hours, I can actually cut my losses with this new employee early and let them go, and I can save a lot of money. There are some astonishing statistics out there by consultants who have studied this situation, and it is incredibly costly to hire the wrong employee. And according to Brad Smart, he wrote this very interesting book called Top Grading. 75% of the time, companies are failing at their hiring process. That means 3 out of 4 new employees are mishires. So I can save the company a lot of money, and honestly, I can save the new employee a lot of frustration and a lot of time by letting them go early if it's taking too long to train them. They're simply not going to be able to succeed at this job. So the job description then can help you gauge whether or not you've got the right person for the position. Again, it makes it tangible. So let's talk about ongoing training. How to use the job description as a manager ongoing is an important thing to know, because it really can become one of your biggest assets. Let's say we have this process here called the customer resolution form, and someone comes into my office and asks me a question. How do we, I got a customer complaint. How do I handle this? The number one rule that you need to follow as a manager is to stop answering all the questions that continue to interrupt you all day long. So again, we're talking about ongoing training. This employee's been here for a while now, and they're interrupting you. When an employee comes to you with, how do I do this? Or how do I do that? Or I did this yesterday and they're asking questions. If you know the answer to the question is in the process, and they're not talking about just a one-off thing. If you know it is a process on their job descriptions, maybe it's in the complaint or the customer resolution form, you can tell them first, go to the process and see if they can answer the question for themselves. You can let them know that if they can't find the answer in the existing documentation, then they can come back to you and look at it, and together you'll edit the process documentation. This is the way that you really innovate and develop this position and its processes, both the position and its processes, because now you're not just stomping out fires and answering questions all day long. You're taking a few extra minutes, and it's not that much more time, and you're really putting a solution in place so that the next day another employee doesn't interrupt you again and ask you the same thing. Or 6 months from now, the same employee yet again comes to you and asks you that same question. That interruption, that lack of learning is costing you more money than it's going to cost you to take a deep breath and say, you know what, go to your job description, go to the process, look for the answer, and let's look at it together if it's not solved there. And so that's the number one thing. Stop being the answer person. Make your employees responsible for their own job, their own content, their own knowledge. And if it's not in the process, then add it. Make them responsible for keeping the processes current and for innovating and developing the existing process. So think about this using this management tool, this job description as a management tool for corrections. Let's say Jamie comes to me and I notice that he's been adding information into ServiceTitan incorrectly. I can sit down with him in a meeting in front of the documentation. I can let him know that he's making these mistakes. Now, first, I want to tell him what the impact is of making those mistakes. I want to really carefully explain the context of the error in case he doesn't understand. A lot of times people really don't understand how important it is that something gets done properly. So I want to make sure that I deliver the context of the error. And then I can say to Jamie, I trained you in this process, and I can even let him know the date that I trained him in the process. And then I might ask the question, so what's up, Jamie? What's going wrong with the process? Let's talk about it. Let's go through it together. Let's figure out where you went off what, maybe the process isn't detailed enough. So you can now notice where my tone is going. Let's figure out what's wrong with the process. It's not what's wrong with you. I've told you 5 times to do it this way. You never listen to me. You're insubordinate. It's not about making Jamie feel bad or guilty from what he's done. And it's also not about you. It's not about you as the manager or the owner who says, I just can't find good employees. I'm the only one who can do this the way it needs to be done. No one else can do it as well as me. All that rhetoric that goes on in your mind, drop it. Lay it down once and for all. Use the job description and the processes as the management tool. Help the employee to own the process, to figure out what went wrong and to fix it. And maybe the process was the source of the problem, because sometimes that is the case. And now you can sit down together, you can look at the steps and you realize, wow, this is sort of confusing. It's not that clear. I can see how you might misunderstand it. And so you fix it together. And remember, if you're using Touchstone, once you fix it, it's fixed for everybody. I don't have to hunt around to try to figure out how to make these edits everywhere else on my hard drive or in Dropbox. So using a job description takes the energy out of the management equation. It's no longer personal. It's a conversation about the processes. It takes all the emotion, angst out of managing. In fact, it makes managing easy. You simply have to hold employees accountable to the processes that they agreed to follow. It's no longer about blaming. The tone of management changes completely. If you do this once or twice, employees are going to get it. They're going to see that they have to be responsible for the content that is in their job description and for following it. And the minute a manager changes their tone and makes the employee accountable to what they're responsible for, and it's done in a very tangible way on a job description, for example, the employee learns something new and it redirects the whole business into a different direction. Now, it takes time to get there and it takes time for the employee to get used to it, but it's completely worth it in the end. Okay, let's continue with management. There are two processes in the Nexstar library, the weekly coaching meetings and the annual performance review, that reinforce the value of using the job description as a management tool. So I'm going to go up here to the 4 key functions. I'm going to click on strategy and management. I'm going to come up to the Nexstar process library, and I'm going to select the annual performance review process and the weekly coaching process right here. I'm going to click save. I've actually done this in Mainstream's account, so I'm not going to download them again. And so you'll see them right here, weekly coaching and annual performance review. Let's click on the weekly one-on-one coaching, and let's look at this weekly check-in meetings. You'll notice again that there is a task here, the weekly check-in meetings. If I wanted to go directly to it in the Nexstar portal, I can just right-click on it and bang, I'm right there. So the assets are all here. The videos are here. All the information I need is here, but it is also in Touchstone. In the weekly one-on-one coaching process, you as a manager sit down with each of your employees one-on-one and talk to them about how the job is going. Now, this could be once a week, could be once or twice a month, it could be once a quarter. I actually don't recommend going longer than once a quarter. And in fact, I think once a quarter is too much time in between meetings. We typically suggest minimum of once a month. And in fact, we really recommend once a week, as does Nexstar. And these meetings can be anywhere from 30 minutes to 45 minutes to 60 minutes long. Now, some of you on the call are probably cringing with the thought of meeting with your reporting employees once weekly. But think of the amount of time that is wasted from miscommunication, poor communication, and lack of communication. What it boils down to when you're not meeting is email after email after email, missed emails, information passing back and forth, phone calls where you don't remember what's happened, questions, things you have to talk about, so you just pick up the phone and contact them, and now everybody's being interrupted. Now, some of this, not all of it, but some of it can wait for the weekly one-on-one coaching meeting. Using this tool, you get more organized with your time. So for example, when I need to speak to one of my reporting employees about something, it could be project related, could be process related, could be anything. Maybe I've overheard them on a call and want to bring them back to a specific script that they're not following. I can go into my one-on-one meeting form and I can actually update, make a note of it, what I want to talk to them about. And then when I actually have the meeting, I can print this out or I can review it. And now I have what I want to speak with them about, and I can work on it with them at the weekly meeting instead of interrupting them right now. Now, of course, if it's urgent, if it's time sensitive, it's an emergency, then you're not going to wait for the weekly meeting. You're going to bring it up right away. But if it can wait, then wait and stop interrupting your people. Let me go back to the org chart. Go back to CSR. Additionally, use the weekly coaching meetings to review the employee's job description. Not every week, but frequently ask the employee that you're meeting with, how are you doing with the outbounding calls, for example? How are you feeling about making these calls? What's your experience been like this week? You can also look at other processes on their job description and acknowledge them for how well they're doing on that specific process. You could say, man, you know, your booking statistics were fantastic this week, Jamie. I really want to acknowledge you for that. It really works to acknowledge an employee for something that they're doing when you're being specific about it. You also might ask them for their input on a specific process or what they think about maybe adding something, for example. It's about communication, and when you're focusing in on the process as you're talking about it, it becomes that much more tangible, that much more powerful. Another part of the weekly one-on-one meeting is checking in with the employee, asking about their projects. Do they have any outstanding issues, questions? You can also just ask them how they're doing, letting them know you care about them. I mean, I'm not saying you just tell them you care about them, but if you ask how they're doing, that tells them you care about them. But always you're reinforcing their job description and their processes. You don't have to go through every process every week, but talk about any issues that they're having with their processes and invite their input on ways to improve them. And as a result, these meetings become very, very focused. And you can do this kind of thing in a department way too. Maybe gathering the entire CSR department, all of your CSRs together, could be a lunch meeting, for example, and you pick a specific process that you think needs attention and you break it down. We call this the process of the month exercise. So what you would do is you'd choose a process from the CSR job description, could be standby script or customer resolution, outbounding, whatever. And you let the CSRs know that as a team, you're all going to focus on it at the process of the month meeting coming up, say, next Wednesday or whatever it is. You ask them to review the existing documentation. You ask them to pay attention to how they're performing the process. Is there anything that they would like to do differently? Ask what they're finding works well, what isn't working well. Are we even still doing it this way? And then you gather as a team, you read through the work plans and the scripts, you get their input, you communicate your findings, and you innovate the process by talking about it as a team. One of the things that many of our clients tell us after doing something like this, it's remarkable how frontline employees feel really appreciated, that management actually listened to them, received their input, received their contribution, and did something about it. And your culture begins to evolve into one of process and innovation, and employees begin to feel that it's a good thing to bring a suggestion and to contribute. And what can happen is those that are not process focused, maybe they're resistant to this whole idea of following processes, suddenly they start getting attracted to this new culture that's developing. They start to see what a good thing it is to actually bring a suggestion or a question, and they begin to see its value, and it becomes the way. It also helps with HR compliance, because if you're dealing with a difficult employee, the weekly one-on-one coaching forums are evidence of your attempts to correct the issue. There are also processes in the touchstone libraries documenting and how and when to issue verbal and written warnings. Also in the Nexstar libraries, a progressive written discipline policy. We're not going to go into that right now, but just so that you know, if you do need to fire someone, the complete history of all of the communication necessary to justify the action can be saved in your touchstone account. So encourage your employees to reference their job descriptions and their processes to remember what they need to do. It's just paramount. It's one of the most important things. Make sure you concentrate on that. If you're going to go through all of the time and effort to document your company's processes, you want to use them. You've got to make them part of what you and they do. It's so hugely beneficial when staff are actually using them. Okay, so let's finally talk about the annual performance review. Let me go up to the CSR job descriptions and let's look at the annual performance review. This, there is a link to the performance review forms in the work plan of this process. So if I go to here and select open link from process, you'll see it. Again, I go right to those assets, but I've actually, and by the way, that asset is the performance review process, et cetera, and the performance review chart, flow chart, et cetera. I've actually downloaded this, the performance review master from the website into from Nexstar into Mainstream's account. And so I'm just going to open up this file here. So you'll notice that there's this section right here, job description. It's part of the annual performance review. What a manager is going to do is they're going to want to review all of the processes on the job description when they're doing the annual performance review. In Touchstone, what you would do is you would go out to the org chart, you would grab that CSR's job description and you would run it out to a Word file. And we're going to then grab it. We're going to copy all these processes all the way down to the end here. And we're going to paste them into the performance review right here. So we're just going to paste them all right in there. Now you've got all of the job descriptions processes listed in the performance evaluation. So we put in the company name, we've got the employee's name, and I can walk through, because all of the content now from the job description has been inserted into the Nexstar annual performance review form. I can grade this employee on each of the processes that they're supposed to be following. I mean, after all, if you're doing a performance review, don't you need to review them on each of the processes that they were responsible to perform? Now, there are other pieces to the performance review form. There are down here at the bottom, there are things like added events they attended, their strengths, their weaknesses, opportunities for improvement, et cetera, et cetera. There's all this content here, but the most important part are all of the processes or responsibilities that they're expected to follow. Again, it's yet another reason why the job description is such a valuable management tool. So as a manager, you'll build a form like this for each of your reporting employees, and then you'll walk through the entire form, grading them using this grading scale provided by Nexstar. Now, first, let me say that if you've been having weekly coaching meetings, the annual performance review, it's so simple. There shouldn't be any surprises, and completing this form should take no time at all. There's so little to think about because you've been talking about these things and working on these things throughout the weeks and months all through the year. Imagine you hire a new CSR. You know how much it's going to cost the company and how long it's going to take to train them. You take them through the new employee training, checking off each process on their job description as they're trained. You're meeting with them weekly in the one-on-one coaching calls. You're sitting down with them and talking about the processes on their job description and how it's going with each of these processes. If there's a problem with anything that they're doing, any of the processes, you can take them back to the work plan or the script, their instructions on how to do what you need them to do, and make sure that they remember that it is there and this is how it needs to be done. And then the year goes by and it's time to do their performance review. And you sit down with the annual performance review form, you have all of the processes. And because you've been meeting with this employee throughout the year, paying attention to these things, what is it going to take you maybe 20 minutes to complete this form? You know exactly how he's doing or she's doing. You know it off the top of your head because you've been talking about it so much. So this is a beautiful thing for any of you who have to do performance reviews. The worst thing, on the contrary, the worst thing is when you have to try to make it up because you just can't remember. You've got 4 or 5 CSRs that you need to review. You can probably remember what's been happening in the past few weeks, but this is an annual performance review. It's hard to remember the specifics of what's been happening for the last 12 months. And so sometimes you're going to make stuff up. And the absolute worst thing is when you write a comment, something you've made up, and the employee asks you a question about it. Well, what do you mean by this, Mike? And I don't really have an answer because it was something that I sort of kind of made up. I sort of had a feeling, but I can't specifically say what happened. Having used the job description all year long, having focused meetings with the reporting employee on the processes that appear on their job description, completing a performance evaluation form is quick and easy. And the best part is that the employee is not going to be surprised because you've been talking about this to them in all these meetings. And if there's an issue, you've probably already resolved it, or you're focusing on how to resolve it. Okay, so let's go to the end. I think we're pretty much getting to the end here. So if you're going to use the internal job description from Nexstar for performance management, you're going to need a little bit more. You're going to need the processes for the position, the instructions that can be used for training the new recruit. This document alone is not really designed to be a management tool. First of all, we don't really need it for hiring because that's the purpose of the external job description. This is a great tool for onboarding. It'll help guide a conversation about the responsibilities of the position and set the expectations that you have for someone filling this position. But how valuable is it a tool for training? There's not much on here that provides instruction for that employee to figure out how to do what they need to do and how you want it done. I would say that this, the external job description is not designed or meant for training. That's the purpose of your processes, and they're probably elsewhere. How about managing an employee? Well, I guess that sort of depends on how you define management. I would say that a key function of managing is holding my reporting employees accountable to the processes that they were trained in and agreed to follow, as well as the expectations of those processes so that we can gain consistency and quality in all of our actions. But there are really no processes on this job description. So I would say that you can't really use the internal job description for managing or for performance reviews. So you now have a lot of stuff to keep track of, right? You have the external job description, you have an internal job description, you have all of the procedures, and these procedures, they might be Word documents, they might be checklists, spreadsheets, PowerPoint presentations, they might be forms that need to be filled in, or training videos or training audios, and they get saved in some employee's local computer, or maybe in some folder somewhere on your company's network, or maybe in Dropbox or Google Docs. And then the operations manual gets created by organizing a bunch of these documents together to create a PDF version of a position's operating manual. This was actually Mainstream's position-specific operating manual for the customer care representative that we actually used to build out that job description and all of the processes for that position in their Touchstone account that we've been seeing in today's demonstration. But now you begin to experience what we call standard operating chaos. You've got all this stuff to keep track of, and your processes are all over the place. Or they might be fairly well organized in some file structure, but then you make a change to some part of a process, or you archive an old process, or you create a new process, and you or the employee does that file save as, and suddenly there are multiple versions of that same process, and people are now starting to use different versions. There are a lot of Nexstar members who come to us because they're in this state of SOP chaos. They have processes in Dropbox and Google Docs all over the place, and they're looking for a better way to organize and implement their operating procedure. Touchstone integrates all of this. It consolidates everything the position needs in one place. Everything inside of Touchstone will be the most current and the most updated version, and it makes it really easy to find what you're looking for. Nexstar members can try Touchstone free for a month. After the trial period, it's $149 per month for unlimited users and access. That's actually a benefit that you get from being a Nexstar member. You get a connection to the Nexstar Business Operations Playbook, as well as our general process libraries. And you get a rebate back each month from Nexstar for your subscription. If you're interested in a free trial, you can text the word Nexstar to this phone number, 707-800-3603, and an account will get set up for you automatically. And there's no credit card required. Once you text that number, you'll be asked for the email that you use with your Nexstar account, and that will get your account set up, and then we'll follow up with you to make sure that you are linked to the Nexstar libraries and the general process libraries, and we teach you how to get started. Okay, so I really want to thank you for joining me today. I hope you found the information to be valuable and useful. We've covered a lot of content today. I know it's been pretty intense. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. Again, my name is Michael Mills. My email address is mmills@businessdesigncorp.com. My direct line is area code 707-522-6253. I really thank you all for joining us today, and I wish you well. Talk to you soon.